just to give people a good idea, because I mean it's talked about a lot that there was Russian trolls on Facebook who were interfering in the 2016 election or in the Brexit vote, and there's been allegations around the world of different campaigns like this, some of which you have brought to light with your story. So what is it that the troll farms are doing? What are these bots doing or attempting to do that is so bad?
So I'm just going to start up with a clarification. So people often use the word bots interchangeably to refer to both scripted accounts that don't have a real person behind them, that are running a script like this at X time, like that at X time, etc. And they also use the word bots to refer to actual people sitting at the computer who are doing things based on some campaign-based fake accounts for, etc. And 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 this and to the average layperson, they may seem similar, but they're actually very different, because actual people are, of course, smarter than computer scripts, and it's the reason why you still have a job after all. And
For now.
I mean, if someone made a script that could pass the Turing test, they would be making trillions on Silicon Valley rather than running some shoddy troll farm for Honduras or etc. And so I want to distinguish between these two types of activity because they're commonly conflated. And what we see with literal actual bots and scripted activity is generally activity that can be large in volume, but it's very stupidly run or silly. Like for instance, if you have a British politician and all his funnels are from Bangladesh or something like that. Or if you, I mean, they're good at doing things in large volume, but they're not very smart about it or sophisticated about it. And actual people tend to be much more effective, but they're also much more pricey because, of course, I mean, you have to pay people to do things. They don't do things for free, and so when you go online and purchase inauthentic activity, it's usually scripted inauthentic activity, and the actual sophisticated humans, they tend to be either dedicated to a specific area or contractors who are essentially operate as for hire mercenaries. And so talking about what they're doing, I mean, it can depend over the place, but often I mean, when most people hear about troll farms and etc., they immediately think about persuasion, and that's certainly one potential area. That is, the trolls convince people to do X when they initially intended to do Y, and that's something. And that's certainly a concern I have. And it takes a certain amount of sophistication, though, to do persuasion, in that you're not going to persuade someone by having 1,000 comments and your politician's page saying, "Great, congratulations, amazing," etc. Which is, I mean, the best you can do with shoddy automated scripts, because I mean, automated scripts are not very good at writing creative comments. And I also want to be I also want to be clear that what I worked on was not the most cutting edge when it comes to technical ability, because I mean, I wasn't highly trained. I was looking for essentially catching the low hanging fruit, because that was simply there because no one had gone out and looked for it before. These were, in law enforcement, you say innocent until proven guilty, and proving guilt can be hard at times. But these were people who were essentially signing their name in the blood of the victim with their own fingerprints. They were the opposite of trying to hide, and. And so what I found was, by definition, not very technically adept at hiding, because I found the people who were not trying very hard to hide. And so I'm sure Russia is much more sophisticated, but I did not catch Russia because they were not completely stupid at trying to hide, because there are actual people looking for Russia or etc. And so what I found and so anyways, going back to the point, I was talking about persuasion. So the most sophisticated attempt at persuasion I saw was actually in India, and I realized that Britons are not actually familiar with Indian political parties. So I'm going to use an analogy to translate this to a hypothetical example in the British context to explain. And again, just to be clear, this did not happen in Britain. I'm just trying to explain for a British context. So for instance, imagine that there's a local elections in Britain. Actually, there were local elections quite recently, a few days ago. And so imagine that in the lead up to the election in a constituency that voted Tories, let's say, there were lots of comments below the pages of local Tory politicians. The saying, I voted Boris Johnson because we needed to get Brexit done, but I'm voting Labour because we need to something Labour, etc. Boris Johnson is getting Brexit done. Now Labour will build a better country, or something like that. I don't know Labour political slogans. I mean, so a lot of comments like that, except smarter than what I just said, that are essentially trying to get crossover political support. And so that's certainly that's an example of a campaign that I saw in India, not in Britain. Again, this did not happen in Britain. I'm using this as an example because I realize British people probably do not know Indian politics. And so that's the thing that most people think about. And the second that I do want to highlight, it's that of perception hacking. And there are multiple dimensions to perception hacking and thinking people are more popular than they actually are. In countries like Britain, for instance, where Britain, of course, has a multi-party political system, so people have to decide who they want to vote for based on tactical considerations. Whether they might want to vote against Labour, and so they have to decide: do I want to vote Lib Dem? Do I vote Tory? Do I vote someone else, etc. Or etc. And so in that case. The perception of how popular a candidate is can potentially, I'm not an expert, I'm not a political scientist, it can potentially make a difference on how many people actually vote for them. Because if you say Lib Dem running for parliament and you have 2 likes on Facebook, people probably will not see you as very credible or something, and so you have a vested incentive to make yourself seem more credible. And so that's one consideration. And the second that I'm personally more concerned about is as follows. So in countries that face periods of turmoil, like dictatorships, like countries that face the risk of coup d'etat, revolution, popular uprisings, political scientists have generally said that in those times, popularity it does not matter so much as the perception of popularity. And what I mean by that is this: because in a dictatorship, people have a strong incentive to pretend that they support the dictator because otherwise they'll face consequences. But if you're a dissident, then you also need to make yourself known to other dissidents so you can band together and overthrow the dictator. And so you may end up with a situation in which everyone hates the dictator, but they're too terrified of acting and they think that everyone else likes the dictator, and so the dictator stays in place. Because in a dictatorship, once it's an uprising, once it's a coup d'etat, then suddenly everyone needs to make a decision: do I support the revolution, or do I support the government? And if you choose incorrectly, you may face death. And so people make the considerations based on who they think will win. And it's the same reason why in many countries in the old Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Pact, dictators felt the need to bust in crowds of paid supporters to show that they still had the support of the people. Because if you're a dictator and you're speaking to an empty plaza, you're just an embarrassment. But the thing about social media is that, like, when you bust in actual crowds of actual people, you have to have actual people. Like if you go to a political rally, no person can pretend to be 1,000 at a political rally. I don't even know how that should work. But on social media, one person can easily pretend to be 1,000 supporters or etc. So it makes it much more easily scalable. And they see this as essentially, and so in many countries like Honduras and Azerbaijan, I see this as essentially a continuation of the busting crowds of the Eastern Bloc. And because popularity can have a very large impact on the survival of an authoritarian government, like the most dramatic example perhaps happened in Romania in 1980 during the Romanian Revolution. The dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, he was speaking to a crowd of Bastin supporters in Bucharest, when suddenly for the first time he was booed to his face. And this had never happened before. This was a crowd of Bastin people who were essentially incentivized to support him. And in one moment, he was the dictator who ruled with an iron fist and had the terror of the people. In the next, he was suddenly an old man shouting at people to get their attention. And the crowd turned on him in the streets of Bucharest. The revolution started in the capital. The next day, the army joined the revolutionaries, and within a few days, he was given a show trial and executed. And this is a very dramatic example, of course, but I think it succinctly illustrates why in the old countries of the Warsaw Pact, dictators felt such a strong need to Bastin supporters to show that they still had the support of the people, because they knew what would happen if suddenly that was in question.
It's kind of similar to the way in which, for example, in America there in 2016, when Bernie Sanders was running for the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton obviously had a lot of institutional support and support online, but Bernie Sanders was the one with like 10,000 people at his rallies. So it shows you how it's easy to paint like a picture of popularity, but when it comes to who would actually go out on the street and do something about, go to protest something or go to support a candidate, that it provides, you get to see when you get to see it in real life, you can know these people are real, and otherwise it's very difficult to tell online.
So, but at the same time, like not everyone goes to political rallies. Not everyone goes. I mean, there are plenty of people who vote who don't go to see candidates because they have actual day jobs. They don't want to see the candidates. They're cynical and think that all the candidates are the same, etc. And it's one metric of support. It's certainly not all of them. And especially when you add on the situation with the pandemic, there's additional dimensions to it. But people see support in person as often more real than social media.
So you're basically saying that the problem is that people, when you're going online, that the perception that someone is popular essentially leads you to perhaps support their popularity, that we tend to.
I think that's the popular assumption, but I'm not so sure about it. But I'm not personally that sure about it. But again, I am not an expert. There's a bit of a bandwagon effect, I suppose. But most people, you tell a Labour supporter that the Tories won the by-election in Hartlepool, I think. I don't know how to pronounce it. And I don't think that's going to convince any Labour supporters to suddenly vote Tory or something. Maybe it would. I'm not an expert. I'm not a political scientist.
I'd be interested to see. It'd be very difficult to do a study on trying to figure out what the impact of seeing those supporting posts, like, for example, the example you used, the hypothetical where, underneath the Tory candidate, you would see people saying, oh, well, I used to vote Labour, but I'm going to vote for the Tory because this reason, or vice versa. I'd be intrigued to see how much of an impact that could actually have on someone's opinion.
It's really hard to test, and it would also be extremely hard to test ethically, because I'm sure someone could do a study, but there are just so many different and disparate impacts, and presumably it would work better in some countries than others.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, or sign up to our mailing list. Thanks a lot to our sponsor, ExpressVPN, the #1 most trusted VPN. Get lightning fast connectivity with servers in 160 locations across 94 countries. Keep your browsing privacy safe with ExpressVPN and get a 35% discount on 12 months of ExpressVPN when you follow the link in the description below. Don't forget my book is now out and available to order on Amazon and on bookshop.org. That's Brexit, the Establishment Civil War. And most importantly, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.